The airport was busy, full of people rushing to get to their gates, carrying bags and luggage, moving quickly through the terminals. It was a typical morning flight with a mix of travelers, families, and business people. The sound of rolling suitcases and announcements over the loudspeakers filled the air. Among the crowd, a young teenager walked calmly with his mother carrying a small backpack. He was dressed casually, wearing jeans and a hoodie, and had a few tattoos on his arms, something that drew attention without him even realizing it. They had their boarding passes ready and were walking towards the gate when a line formed for first-class boarding. The teenager and his mother were allowed to go through first class because they had booked seats there, and it was part of a long journey. As they approached, a woman sitting nearby noticed him. She was dressed in business casual attire, sipping coffee, looking around the cabin with a sharp gaze. When her eyes landed on the teen, she stiffened, her expression changing from relaxed to suspicious. She watched as he approached his seat. He walked with confidence but quietly, holding his ticket and making no noise that would bother anyone. Yet the woman seemed to see something she didn't like. She whispered to herself, frowning, and then called a flight attendant over. Her voice was calm but tense, filled with doubt and a little fear, as if she believed she had seen something wrong. The flight attendant approached politely, ready to listen. The woman quickly pointed at the teen, describing him in a way that exaggerated her concern. "I think he shouldn't be sitting here. I'm not comfortable," she said, glancing nervously around. The flight attendant listened, maintaining professionalism, but inside there was a sense that perhaps the woman was overreacting. The teen, meanwhile, had found his seat and was quietly settling in, putting his backpack under the seat and taking out a book. He seemed calm, unaware of the scrutiny he was under. The woman continued, whispering to the flight attendant, her voice rising slightly in frustration. She gestured toward the teen and said something about not feeling safe, though there had been no sign of any threat or misbehavior. Other passengers nearby began noticing the tension, some turning their heads to see what was happening. A few exchanged glances, sensing that the situation might be based more on fear than reality. The teen's mother smiled politely at the flight attendant, saying nothing, trying not to escalate the situation. She could feel the tension in the air but stayed calm, knowing her son had done nothing wrong. The teen, completely unaware of the storm forming around him, opened his book and started reading. He was focused, flipping through pages and occasionally glancing out the window at the clouds in the distance. The woman's eyes, however, were fixed on him. She leaned slightly forward, whispering again to the flight attendant, describing him as though he was a problem waiting to happen. Her voice carried a mix of fear and authority, and she seemed convinced that action needed to be taken immediately. Passengers nearby began to feel the unease. Some looked at the teen, then at the woman, and back again, unsure of what was going on. The cabin was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional murmur of other travelers. The teen's calm presence contrasted sharply with the woman's tension. He was polite, respectful, and focused, doing everything expected of a passenger in first class. Yet the woman could not see past her assumptions, and her suspicion grew stronger. The flight attendant, trying to maintain order, asked the woman to explain her concerns calmly. The woman's hands moved nervously and she spoke quickly, describing the teen's appearance and implying that he didn't belong in first class. She mentioned his tattoos, the way he carried himself, and other superficial details that had nothing to do with any real behavior. Her words were sharp, but the teen remained unaware, still absorbed in his book and the rhythm of the airport noises fading behind him. Other passengers were starting to notice the tension. Some shifted in their seats, trying to catch a glimpse of what was causing the disturbance. A few people whispered to each other, wondering if the woman's concerns were valid. There was an undercurrent of discomfort in the cabin, a sense that something was off, though nothing had actually happened. The teen's mother placed a hand on his shoulder briefly, giving a reassuring smile. She trusted her son and knew that the situation was based on misunderstanding, not reality. As the boarding continued, the woman seemed determined to escalate. She gestured again toward the teen, her voice a little louder, insisting that action needed to be taken. The flight attendant remained calm, asking her to be patient and explaining that the teen was simply a passenger following all rules. The woman shook her head, still convinced that there was a problem, and her frustration grew. She was creating tension not only for herself, but also for the people around her. The teen, meanwhile, continued to focus on his book, showing no sign of distress or awareness of the woman's accusations. His calm demeanor was in stark contrast to the growing anxiety of the woman. Passengers nearby began to take notice, some feeling uncomfortable for the woman's reaction, and some silently questioning her judgment. The mother, sensing the tension rising, leaned closer to her son, whispering that everything would be fine and that he should continue to stay calm. He nodded, understanding that staying composed was the best way to handle the situation. The woman's whispers to the flight attendant continued, and soon she mentioned the idea of calling airport security. Her voice carried a sense of urgency, as if she believed something dangerous was about to happen. The flight attendant, trying to de-escalate, reassured her that the teen posed no threat and that the airline staff were trained to handle any real issues. Still, the woman seemed convinced that action needed to be taken immediately. Her hand shook slightly as she held her coffee cup, and her eyes darted around the cabin, searching for confirmation of her fears. The teen's calmness became more noticeable to the surrounding passengers. Some began to nod subtly to themselves, recognizing that the woman's suspicion had no basis. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the tension she was creating. The mother smiled politely at the flight attendant again, silently asking for patience and understanding. She remained composed, knowing that the situation could be resolved simply by not overreacting. The woman, however, continued to build the narrative in her mind, seeing danger where there was none. She whispered about the teen's tattoos, his clothing, and his quiet demeanor, interpreting everything as a sign of threat. The flight attendant listened politely, trying to calm her and maintain order in the cabin. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. The teen, oblivious to the mounting tension, turned another page in his book, completely focused and relaxed. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin was tense but controlled. The teen's calm and polite behavior contrasted sharply with the woman's growing panic and suspicion. Passengers watched quietly, some exchanging glances that conveyed concern for the teen and curiosity about the woman's reaction. The mother remained supportive, keeping a gentle hand on her son's shoulder, a subtle reassurance that everything was okay. As the boarding process continued, the woman seemed to be making a decision. Her whispers became more insistent, and her gestures more animated. She seemed convinced that something needed to be done about the teen, despite the lack of any real problem. The flight attendant maintained a calm demeanor, explaining that the teen was simply a passenger and that there was no cause for concern. Yet the woman's mind was made up, and she appeared ready to escalate the situation further. The teen continued reading, unaware of the attention and suspicion directed at him. His focus and calmness made him seem even more composed compared to the woman's agitation. Other passengers began to notice this contrast, and some started to realize that the situation was not as serious as the woman believed. The mother whispered again to her son, encouraging him to stay calm and polite, which he did without hesitation. Finally, the tension reached a point where the woman could no longer hold back. She called the flight attendant closer again, raising her voice slightly, insisting that the situation be addressed immediately. The surrounding passengers looked on, some with concern, some with curiosity, as the woman continued to express her fear and suspicion. The teen remained seated, calm and polite, a stark contrast to the growing tension caused by her false assumptions. In that moment, the cabin felt quiet except for the woman's insistence and the occasional murmurs of other passengers. The teen's calmness, his polite demeanor, and his focus on his book highlighted the unnecessary tension caused by the woman's suspicion. The mother's supportive presence reassured him, and the flight attendant tried to mediate, keeping the situation under control. As the boarding process continued around them, the stage was set for the conflict to escalate. The woman was convinced that something must be done, while the teen remained calm, polite, and unaware of the accusations against him. The first-class cabin, filled with passengers who were starting to notice the situation, became a silent audience to the tension, waiting to see how it would unfold. The teen's quiet composure and the mother's gentle reassurance created a stark contrast to the woman's growing agitation, setting the scene for what was about to happen next. The teen remained seated, focused on his book, unaware of the storm that was quietly brewing around him. The woman, however, could not shake her feelings of discomfort. Every small movement he made, the way he turned a page, even the way he adjusted his hoodie, seemed to confirm the fears she had already convinced herself were true. She leaned closer to the flight attendant again, whispering urgently, and this time her voice was sharper, almost trembling. "I really think something should be done," she said. "I don't feel safe with him here." The flight attendant nodded politely, trying to maintain calm. She had seen many passengers become nervous for no reason, and she knew this situation was delicate. "Ma'am, please just take a moment and explain exactly what you are seeing," she said gently. The woman's voice quickened as she listed out her concerns, pointing subtly to the teen and describing his tattoos and his quiet manner as if they were warnings. She described nothing specific he had done, yet she painted an image in her own mind of danger that had not existed. Nearby passengers began to notice her agitation. Some looked over from their seats, eyebrows raised, curious about the tension. A couple of passengers whispered quietly among themselves, wondering if there really was a problem. Others just stared, unsure whether to intervene or remain neutral. The flight attendant listened carefully, and then asked if the woman would like them to move her seat or address her concern differently. The woman shook her head, her hands shaking slightly, insisting that action must be taken against the teen. She was certain that this was serious, even though the teen had done nothing. The teen's mother noticed the escalating tension. She leaned in closer to her son and spoke softly, whispering, "Just stay calm, keep your focus. Don't react to her. Everything will be fine." The teen nodded silently, turning another page in his book, completely calm and composed. He had no idea that someone was interpreting him incorrectly, or that the woman's fear was building to a point where it could involve security. The woman grew more anxious, her mind spinning with scenarios of what could happen if the teen remained in first class. She imagined all sorts of dangers, none of which were real. She whispered to the flight attendant about these imagined threats, urging that something be done immediately. The flight attendant, professional and calm, reminded her that there was no sign of misbehavior, and that the teen was a ticketed passenger entitled to his seat. Still, the woman seemed unable to see reason. Her nervousness was rising, her hands gripping the armrest of her seat tightly. Around them, passengers continued to notice the situation. Some shifted in their seats, feeling uncomfortable for the teen. Others glanced at the woman, sensing that her reaction might be exaggerated. Some exchanged quiet comments, wondering why she seemed so convinced of danger when there was none. The atmosphere in the cabin was tense but controlled. The teen remained a model of calmness and politeness, and his mother maintained a gentle, reassuring presence. The woman suddenly spoke louder, drawing more attention from those nearby. She was clearly frustrated that the flight attendant did not immediately act on her concerns. She insisted again that the teen should not be in first class, implying that he was a risk. Her voice carried a tone of authority and fear mixed together, but it was based entirely on assumption. The flight attendant, trying to manage the situation delicately, asked her to remain calm while they verified the teen's ticket and explained that the airline policy allowed him to sit there. The teen, still unaware, quietly closed his book for a moment and adjusted his seatbelt, a simple action that somehow seemed suspicious to the woman. Her eyes narrowed and she leaned forward, ready to speak again. "I think this is serious," she said more insistently. The flight attendant nodded, maintaining calm. She explained that they could not remove a passenger without reason, and that everything appeared normal. Yet the woman seemed unwilling to accept this, believing that action must be taken immediately. The mother of the teen noticed the woman's insistence and placed a hand gently on her son's shoulder. She leaned down and whispered, "It's okay, don't worry about her. She doesn't know you and she's mistaken." The teen looked up, gave a small nod, and then returned to his book. His calm, polite behavior contrasted sharply with the woman's growing tension, which seemed to worsen with every passing second. The woman's whispering turned into a muttered insistence. As she mentioned the idea of involving airport security, she described in detail why she thought the teen posed a problem, though there was nothing concrete to support her claim. Her voice trembled slightly, and she looked around the cabin to see if anyone else agreed with her. Most passengers, however, were silent or looked away, sensing that the situation was being exaggerated. The flight attendant continued to manage the situation patiently. She reassured the woman and asked if she wanted to explain her concerns calmly, so they could consider options. The woman nodded, but her anxiety seemed to prevent her from speaking rationally. She gestured toward the teen and described more imagined problems, each one based on appearance and mannerisms rather than actual behavior. The surrounding passengers could see the contrast between the calm teen and the worried woman, and a few began to realize that the problem was being created in her mind, not by the teen. The mother, still seated beside her son, maintained a quiet presence, occasionally giving him a reassuring glance. She did not want to draw attention or escalate the situation, but she remained aware of how tense the woman was becoming. The teen, oblivious to the accusations, continued to focus on his book and his quiet surroundings. His calm composure made him appear even more mature and polite, highlighting the unnecessary tension the woman had created. After a few minutes, the woman's anxiety reached a peak. She called over another flight attendant for reinforcement, explaining her fears and suggesting that someone needed to intervene immediately. Her insistence was loud enough to draw more passengers' attention, and some began to murmur quietly to each other. The flight attendants remained professional, listening and explaining that the teen had done nothing wrong. But the woman was determined to escalate the situation. Her imagination continued to fuel her fear. She described hypothetical dangers, creating a story in her mind where the teen was a threat. The flight attendant tried to calmly remind her that assumptions were not evidence, but the woman seemed unable to accept this. Her voice became sharper and more urgent, and she gestured toward the teen as if to make her point visible to everyone around her. Passengers watched quietly, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others feeling sympathy for the teen. The teen, still polite and calm, glanced briefly around the cabin and then returned to his book. He did not react to the whispers, the gestures, or the growing tension. His calm demeanor highlighted the fact that he had done nothing wrong, and that the woman's fears were unfounded. His mother whispered once more, reassuring him, and he nodded, maintaining his focus. The woman's whispers escalated into louder speech, still insisting that something must be done. She mentioned again that airport security should be called immediately. The flight attendant, now trying to handle the situation with more care, explained that security could be called, but only if there was a real issue. The woman's insistence made it clear that she believed she had a real threat, even though it was based entirely on assumption. Passengers around them began to notice the stark contrast. The teen remained composed, polite, and focused on his book, while the woman's fear and insistence grew. Some passengers exchanged quiet looks, realizing that the teen was not the problem, and that the woman's actions were creating unnecessary tension. Others remained silent, unsure whether to speak up or stay out of it. The mother continued her quiet support, making sure her son felt safe and composed. The woman, now fully convinced that action needed to be taken, spoke louder, describing her imagined scenario and emphasizing that she felt unsafe. The flight attendant remained calm, explaining that all passengers are entitled to their seats and that there was no cause for concern. The woman, however, seemed unwilling to accept any reasoning and continued to insist that the teen should not be in first class. The tension in the cabin continued to build, with passengers noticing the woman's agitation and the teen's calm response. The mother leaned closer to her son again, whispering encouragement and reassurance. He looked up briefly, gave a polite smile, and then returned to his book. His calm, polite presence highlighted the unnecessary tension that the woman had created. The situation reached a point where the woman was clearly ready to escalate further. She whispered insistently about calling security, describing more imagined threats and risks. The flight attendant tried to mediate, maintaining professionalism and patience, but the woman's mind was made up. Passengers continued to watch quietly, sensing that the woman's actions were based on fear and assumptions rather than reality. The teen remained composed, polite, and focused. He did not react to the whispers, the gestures, or the growing tension in the cabin. His calm demeanor made it clear to everyone paying attention that he posed no threat. Yet the woman seemed unable to recognize this. Her insistence grew louder, her fear more visible, and she continued to press for action, fully convinced that she was right. The woman's insistence had grown louder, her agitation filling the first-class cabin. Flight attendants, maintaining professionalism, finally decided it was best to follow protocol and involve airport security. They reassured the passengers that everything was under control, but explained that they needed to investigate the concern. The woman nodded, relieved, certain that she was right, while other passengers looked on, a mix of curiosity and apprehension in their expressions. The teen continued to sit calmly, his book resting gently in his lap. He had sensed some tension earlier, but nothing had directly affected him and he remained focused. His mother placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, whispering, "Just stay calm, keep reading. Everything will be fine." He nodded quietly, turning another page, completely composed despite the escalating situation around him. Within a few minutes, airport security arrived. 2 officers entered the cabin, their presence calm but firm. They carried no weapons drawn, just badges and the authority of their uniforms. Their first step was to listen carefully, so they approached the woman first. She quickly began recounting her story, describing the teen as a potential threat. Her voice was urgent, but when they looked at the teen, sitting quietly and politely, it became clear that she had no real evidence beyond her assumptions. The officers nodded politely, taking notes and asking questions. They then turned to the teen and his mother. The mother calmly explained that the teen had done nothing wrong, that they had tickets for first class and that he was simply traveling with her. The teen spoke politely, answering any questions with a calm tone. His demeanor was respectful and composed, a stark contrast to the tension caused by the woman's accusations. Passengers watched quietly, their attention divided between the officers, the woman, and the teen. Some shook their heads subtly, realizing that the teen's calmness highlighted the woman's unnecessary worry. Others exchanged looks of relief, understanding that the situation was likely based on fear and assumptions, not fact. The woman, however, seemed determined to maintain her story, emphasizing her discomfort and insisting that action was needed immediately. The security officers remained professional, asking the woman to describe specific behaviors or actions that had made her feel unsafe. She repeated her claims, focusing on the teen's appearance and the way he carried himself. The officers exchanged glances, clearly noting that there were no actual behaviors that justified concern. They calmly explained that assumptions about appearance alone were not sufficient reason to remove a passenger or escalate the situation further. The teen continued to remain composed, listening politely when asked questions and responding respectfully. His calm demeanor, paired with the mother's gentle support, provided a stark contrast to the woman's agitation. Passengers began to murmur quietly, some expressing sympathy for the teen and others showing disapproval of the woman's actions. The cabin atmosphere was tense but controlled, with the officers carefully mediating the situation. The woman, noticing that the officers were not immediately agreeing with her, grew more frustrated. She described imagined scenarios of what could have happened if the teen had acted differently, emphasizing her feelings of danger. The officers listened patiently, explaining repeatedly that there was no real threat and that the teen had done nothing wrong. The woman seemed unable to accept this, her fear outweighing the facts. Passengers continued to observe, some exchanging quiet comments about how calm and polite the teen remained. Others shook their heads at the woman's insistence, realizing that she had escalated a situation without any justification. The mother maintained her quiet support, keeping her son focused and reassured. The teen, for his part, showed no sign of distress, handling the situation with grace and maturity. The officers asked the teen if he understood the situation and if he had done anything to provoke concern. He responded politely, explaining that he had simply been following the rules and sitting in the seat that was booked for him. He emphasized that he was unaware of any issues and had done nothing to cause concern. The officers nodded, clearly noting his composed and honest demeanor. The woman continued to press her case, insisting that someone needed to take action. She described hypothetical dangers, emphasizing that she felt unsafe. But the officers explained that feelings alone could not justify removing a ticketed passenger. They asked her to focus on actual behavior rather than assumptions. Her insistence faltered slightly as she realized there was no evidence, but she continued to express discomfort, hoping for a resolution that would satisfy her fears. Passengers were now more openly reacting. Some gave supportive glances to the teen and his mother, while others looked at the woman with subtle disapproval. The contrast between calm and composed behavior and fear-driven assumption was becoming obvious. The flight attendants continued to assist, ensuring that everyone remained safe and that the situation did not escalate further. The officers asked the teen's mother about their tickets and travel plans. She explained that they were traveling for a family trip, and that first-class seats had been booked for convenience due to the length of the flight. The officers verified the tickets and confirmed that everything was in order. The teen's polite and honest responses further supported their assessment that there was no cause for concern. The woman's expression began to change as the reality of the situation became clear. The officers explained firmly but kindly that the teen posed no threat and that there was no reason for security to take action. Her earlier confidence began to waver, and a faint sense of regret began to appear on her face. Passengers observed this subtle change, some nodding in quiet approval of how the situation was being resolved. Despite the tension, the teen remained composed, showing no sign of distress or anger. His calmness highlighted the unnecessary escalation caused by the woman's assumptions. His mother whispered a reassuring word to him and he nodded, understanding that staying polite and composed was the best way to navigate the situation. The security officers thanked the mother and the teen for their cooperation and assured them that they could continue their journey without further concern. The woman, now realizing that there had been no real problem, sat back in her seat. Her expression reflected a mixture of embarrassment, regret, and realization. Passengers around her shifted quietly, some offering sympathetic glances to her, others still focused on the teen and his composed behavior. The contrast between fear, based on assumption, and calmness, based on truth, was clear to everyone in the cabin. The flight attendants ensured that the woman remained calm and offered reassurances that the flight would continue without incident. They explained the importance of remaining patient and objective in situations like these. The woman listened quietly, her earlier insistence now replaced by a subdued understanding. She avoided looking directly at the teen, as if acknowledging silently that her actions had been unnecessary. Passengers returned their attention to preparing for the flight, some exchanging quiet comments about how unusual the situation had been. The teen returned to his book, maintaining his calm and polite demeanor. His mother smiled gently at him, proud of his composure and ability to remain focused despite the tension. The officers, satisfied that there was no real threat, quietly exited the cabin, leaving the passengers to settle in for their journey. The atmosphere began to relax, though the memory of the tension lingered in the air. Passengers whispered quietly to each other, reflecting on what had happened and noting the contrast between the teen's calm behavior and the woman's unnecessary fear. The woman remained subdued, her earlier insistence now replaced by a quiet reflection on her actions. The teen continued reading, his calm presence serving as a reminder of how composure and politeness can diffuse tension. The first-class cabin gradually returned to normal. Passengers adjusted in their seats, some giving subtle smiles to the teen and his mother, acknowledging the grace with which they had handled the situation. The woman looked down at her lap, silently reflecting on her behavior, while the teen remained focused on his book, unaffected by the drama that had unfolded around him. His calmness and composure highlighted the lesson that assumptions and fear can lead to unnecessary conflict, while patience and understanding can resolve situations with dignity. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the teen quietly closed his book, placed it gently in his bag, and adjusted his seatbelt. His mother gave him a reassuring smile, proud of his maturity and politeness. The woman remained quiet, her earlier agitation replaced by reflection and a growing sense of regret. The passengers settled into their seats, the tension dissipating as the reality of the situation became clear. The teen had done nothing wrong, and the situation had been unnecessarily escalated by fear and assumption. The teen's calmness and the mother's quiet support had prevented the situation from spiraling further. Security had confirmed that there was no threat, and passengers had observed the difference between composed behavior and fear-driven assumptions. The lesson was evident. Assumptions can create conflict, but calmness, politeness, and truth can resolve it peacefully. As the plane began its journey, the first-class cabin returned to a quiet, composed atmosphere, with the teen and his mother ready to enjoy their flight, and the woman left to reflect on her actions and the unnecessary tension she had caused. After the airport security officers left the cabin, the tension slowly began to settle, but the atmosphere was still charged with unease. Passengers were quiet, some still casting subtle glances at the teen and his mother, perhaps reflecting on the situation they had just witnessed. The woman who had caused the commotion sat back in her seat, now silent, her earlier agitation replaced by a quiet, almost embarrassed demeanor. She avoided looking directly at the teen, and her hands fidgeted slightly in her lap. It was clear that the reality of the situation had begun to dawn on her, though pride and discomfort made it difficult for her to admit her mistake openly. The teen remained composed, sitting quietly in his seat. He glanced out the window briefly, watching the clouds drift past, and then returned to his book. He did not appear angry or upset. Instead, his calm presence seemed to radiate a quiet confidence. His mother placed a hand on his shoulder once more, giving him a reassuring smile and whispering, "You handled that very well. I'm proud of you." The teen nodded politely, a small, humble gesture acknowledging her praise without drawing attention to himself. His dignity in the face of false accusation had not gone unnoticed by the surrounding passengers. A few passengers, who had been observing the situation closely, began whispering quietly among themselves. Some expressed relief that the teen was unharmed, while others discussed the unnecessary escalation caused by the woman's assumptions. A few even offered subtle nods of respect or supportive glances toward the teen and his mother. These small gestures created a ripple of understanding and empathy, highlighting how composure and kindness can quietly inspire others. Even in tense circumstances, the woman's attention, however, remained fixed on the teen, though her gaze was no longer sharp or accusatory. Instead, it was mixed with regret and a growing sense of self-awareness. She seemed to be replaying the events in her mind, realizing that her assumptions had caused unnecessary tension and embarrassment. Her earlier confidence was gone, replaced by the uncomfortable understanding that she had acted unfairly and without reason. Flight attendants continued to circulate the cabin, offering reassurance to passengers and making sure that everyone was comfortable. One of them approached the woman, speaking softly and professionally. "Ma'am, the situation has been clarified. The passenger in question has done nothing wrong. Perhaps taking a moment to relax would help. We appreciate your cooperation." The woman nodded, her face slightly flushed, and murmured a quiet acknowledgement. She no longer seemed as assertive or sure of herself. The confrontation had taken a toll on her confidence. The teen's mother, sensing that the situation had reached its final stage, leaned into her son and whispered again, "Stay calm and polite like you always do. Everything is fine now." The teen smiled gently, appreciating her support, and returned his attention to his book. The act of continuing as if nothing had happened emphasized his resilience and ability to maintain dignity under pressure. It was a small but powerful lesson in handling conflict without letting it consume one's emotions. As the flight progressed, passengers began to settle back into their routines. Some adjusted their seats, some quietly chatted with companions, and others simply looked out the windows, allowing the scenery to capture their attention. The woman, meanwhile, sat quietly, occasionally glancing at the teen and the mother, her mind clearly replaying the earlier events. She seemed to be reflecting on her actions, perhaps questioning why she had allowed fear and assumptions to dictate her behavior. There was a quiet humility in her demeanor, a silent acknowledgement that she had been wrong. The teen continued to read, flipping pages with gentle focus. His calmness and quiet confidence seemed to influence the surrounding passengers subtly. A few who had been tense or curious earlier now relaxed, their attention drawn to his composed presence. Even some who had been critical of the woman's actions earlier seemed to soften, recognizing the teen's dignity and polite nature. It was a reminder that behavior and character often speak louder than appearances or assumptions. Meanwhile, the woman occasionally shifted in her seat, fidgeting slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the memory of her overreaction. She avoided conversation and looked down, her earlier insistence and tension replaced by introspection. She seemed to be struggling internally, recognizing that her actions had caused unnecessary stress not only for the teen and his mother, but also for the flight attendants and other passengers. Her realization was subtle but significant, a turning point in her understanding of the consequences of assumptions and bias. The flight attendants continued to monitor the cabin, ensuring that everyone was comfortable and that there were no lingering concerns. They moved quietly and professionally, aware of the delicate situation that had unfolded. Their calm and measured presence helped maintain a sense of order and reassurance, emphasizing that professionalism and patience can often diffuse tense situations effectively. Passengers seemed to respond positively to this atmosphere, gradually relaxing as the flight continued. The mother of the teen noticed the subtle shifts in passenger attention and leaned slightly closer to her son. She whispered softly, "See how calmly you handled everything? That's why people notice. It shows strength and patience." The teen nodded, understanding her words not just as praise but as reinforcement of a principle he had already been practicing. His calm response had not only protected him, but also demonstrated to others how dignity and composure can influence the dynamics of a tense situation. The woman, seated nearby, occasionally caught snippets of conversation among passengers discussing the incident in hushed tones. Some were quietly criticizing her actions, while others noted the teen's composure and polite responses. These conversations, though not directed at her, seemed to deepen her self-awareness. She shifted in her seat again, her earlier confidence replaced by the understanding that she had acted unfairly. She seemed to be processing a complex mix of embarrassment, regret, and realization, slowly acknowledging that her actions had been unnecessary. The teen returned to his book, reading quietly, his calm presence becoming a steadying influence in the cabin. His mother smiled gently, observing how he maintained focus and politeness despite the earlier stress. It was a small but meaningful display of maturity and emotional control, one that subtly inspired the passengers around them. The woman, meanwhile, remained quiet, her eyes occasionally glancing downward, clearly reflecting on the situation and the unnecessary tension she had caused. As the flight continued, passengers began to adjust to the rhythm of the journey. Some reclined their seats, others quietly chatted or watched the scenery, and a few simply observed the calm scene unfolding in first class. The teen's composed demeanor and polite responses became a silent lesson to those around him, demonstrating the power of calmness, patience, and dignity in resolving conflict. The woman's quiet reflection served as a contrast, highlighting the impact of fear, assumptions, and overreaction. The flight attendants periodically checked on passengers, offering assistance and ensuring that everyone was comfortable. Their professionalism and calm demeanor contributed to a sense of stability in the cabin. The woman seemed to appreciate this quietly, although her earlier tension lingered as a reminder of the consequences of acting on assumptions. She avoided direct interaction, choosing instead to remain introspective and subdued. The mother leaned gently toward her son again, whispering words of encouragement and reassurance. The teen smiled politely, understanding the importance of maintaining composure and dignity. He continued reading, fully absorbed in his book, demonstrating a quiet resilience that contrasted sharply with the woman's earlier agitation. Passengers around them observed the contrast, some nodding subtly in recognition of his maturity and poise. The woman, now clearly reflecting on the incident, seemed to experience a growing sense of regret. Her earlier insistence and agitation had given way to self-awareness, and she seemed to understand that her assumptions had caused unnecessary tension. She sat quietly, occasionally glancing at the teen and his mother, perhaps recognizing the unfairness of her actions. The passengers around her, having witnessed the entire scenario, seemed to appreciate the resolution and the teen's composed behavior. As the flight continued, the cabin atmosphere gradually returned to normal. The teen remained calm, reading quietly while his mother provided gentle support. The woman remained subdued, reflecting on her actions and the unnecessary tension she had caused. Passengers adjusted their seats, relaxed, and continued with their own routines. The flight attendants maintained a watchful but unobtrusive presence, ensuring that the cabin remained peaceful and orderly. The teen's composed demeanor served as a subtle lesson for everyone around him. His patience, politeness, and dignity in the face of false accusation highlighted the power of calm and measured responses. The woman's reflection and quiet regret underscored the consequences of assumptions and fear-driven actions. Passengers who had observed the events now had a clear understanding of how composure and respect can resolve conflicts and inspire those around them. The mother whispered one final time, "You did very well. Remember, being calm and polite always makes a difference." The teen nodded gently, a quiet affirmation of the lesson he had reinforced through his behavior. The flight continued smoothly, the first-class cabin now filled with a sense of calm and quiet reflection. The woman remained introspective, processing the events, while the teen and his mother settled into the journey, their dignity and composure leaving a lasting impression on those around them. The flight continued, and the cabin gradually returned to a calm and quiet atmosphere. The teen had resumed reading his book, completely absorbed in the story, while his mother sat beside him, occasionally glancing out the window or adjusting her seat. The woman who had caused the earlier commotion remained quiet, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes lowered. She seemed to be reflecting deeply, realizing the unnecessary tension and embarrassment she had caused, not just to the teen and his mother, but to herself and the other passengers. Passengers around them slowly relaxed, some continuing their own activities, and some discreetly observing the situation with a sense of quiet relief. A few who had witnessed the incident whispered quietly to one another, commenting on the teen's calm and polite behavior and the woman's noticeable shift from confidence to self-awareness. The contrast was striking, and it left an impression on many of the passengers who had been part of the scene. The woman occasionally glanced up, her gaze unintentionally meeting the teen's. For a brief moment, their eyes met and the teen gave a small, polite nod, acknowledging her presence without any hint of anger or resentment. The woman quickly looked away, feeling a wave of shame and regret. It was as if in that single, quiet gesture, she could see the dignity and maturity that she herself had lacked in that moment of fear and assumption. Flight attendants moved quietly through the cabin, offering snacks, drinks, and assistance, maintaining a professional and calm environment. Their presence reassured passengers, ensuring that the situation did not escalate again and that everyone felt safe and attended to. The teen continued to remain composed, a model of patience and politeness, while his mother whispered gentle words of encouragement from time to time, reinforcing the lesson of staying calm in difficult situations. The woman, sitting alone now in her thoughts, reflected on her actions. She replayed the events in her mind, realizing how quickly she had jumped to conclusions based on appearances alone. She felt a deep sense of embarrassment for her behavior and understood how unfair it had been to the teen and his family. The whispers she had overheard from other passengers, the polite yet composed demeanor of the teen, and the quiet support from his mother all combined to create a moment of self-awareness she could not ignore. Meanwhile, the teen continued reading, occasionally glancing out the window at the clouds drifting past. He remained completely composed, showing no sign of distress or resentment. His calm behavior quietly demonstrated that kindness, patience, and dignity can rise above false accusations and unnecessary conflict. It was a subtle but powerful message that had not gone unnoticed by the other passengers, some of whom gave small, approving nods or smiles in his direction. The woman shifted in her seat, fidgeting slightly, her mind racing with the recognition of how her fear and assumptions had escalated a situation that required no action. She felt the weight of her own actions, realizing that she had embarrassed herself in front of other passengers, inconvenienced the flight attendants, and caused stress to the teen and his mother. The realization of her mistake brought a mixture of regret, shame, and a desire to correct her thinking in the future. The teen's mother leaned gently toward him and whispered once more, reinforcing the idea that staying calm and composed is always the best response. The teen nodded silently, understanding the importance of maintaining dignity, even in challenging situations. His behavior served as a quiet lesson, not just for the woman but for all the passengers who had observed the incident. The woman's silent reflection contrasted sharply with the teen's continued calmness, highlighting the lesson of patience and empathy. Throughout the flight, the woman remained subdued, avoiding direct interaction with the teen and his mother. Her eyes occasionally drifted toward them, and each glance seemed to reinforce the understanding of how her actions had been unfair. The passengers around her, many of whom had witnessed the incident unfold, continued to observe discreetly, recognizing the teen's composed behavior and the woman's gradual realization of her mistake. There was a quiet sense of resolution in the cabin, though the memory of the earlier tension lingered as a reminder of how assumptions can cause unnecessary conflict. The flight attendants continued their rounds, checking in on passengers and ensuring that everyone was comfortable. They moved with calm efficiency, a steady presence that helped maintain a sense of normalcy. The woman occasionally caught snippets of conversations around her, hearing subtle remarks about the teen's polite and composed behavior. These whispers served as a mirror for her reflection, reinforcing the lesson that her actions had been misplaced and that the teen's dignity had remained intact throughout the ordeal. The teen, unaware of the full depth of the woman's self-reflection, remained focused on his book. His calm demeanor and polite responses had created an environment in which the situation had been resolved without escalation or conflict. His mother whispered occasionally, reinforcing the importance of maintaining composure and patience. These small gestures of encouragement highlighted the human-centric focus of the story. Emphasizing the value of empathy, kindness, and understanding, the woman, now fully aware of the consequences of her assumptions, sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap. She reflected on how quickly fear and bias had led her to act unfairly, and how her actions had caused unnecessary tension in a public space. Her silent reflection was a moment of personal growth, as she recognized the importance of questioning assumptions and treating others with fairness and respect. The passengers around her continued to observe quietly, some offering subtle nods of approval toward the teen and his mother, acknowledging their grace and composure. As the flight progressed, the teen continued to read, occasionally adjusting his seat or glancing out the window. His calm and composed behavior remained a quiet source of inspiration for those around him. The mother continued to offer gentle support and reassurance, reinforcing the lesson of patience and dignity. The woman's subdued reflection provided a stark contrast, highlighting how fear and assumptions can escalate, unnecessary conflict, and how awareness and humility can lead to growth and understanding. Passengers who had witnessed the incident began to settle back into their routines, some quietly chatting, some observing the scenery, and some reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The teen's calm behavior served as a reminder that patience, kindness, and composure can diffuse tension and demonstrate dignity, even in challenging situations. The woman, still quietly reflecting, seemed to internalize this lesson, recognizing the need for self-awareness and humility. The mother whispered one final time, reinforcing the importance of staying calm and polite. The teen nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement and understanding. His composed behavior had not only resolved the situation peacefully, but had also left a lasting impression on the passengers around him. The woman's silent reflection and growing awareness underscored the consequences of assumptions and the value of empathy, providing a meaningful conclusion to the incident. As the plane continued its journey, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin returned to a sense of normalcy. Passengers adjusted their seats, resumed their conversations, or simply observed the scenery outside. The teen remained calm, reading quietly while his mother provided gentle support. The woman continued her quiet reflection, processing the events and the lessons learned from her actions. The contrast between fear-driven assumptions and composed dignity remained evident, leaving a lasting impression on all who had witnessed the incident. In the final moments of the flight, the teen closed his book gently and placed it in his bag. His mother smiled warmly, proud of how he had handled the situation with patience, politeness, and composure. The woman, still quietly reflecting, seemed to acknowledge internally the lessons of humility, empathy, and self-awareness. Passengers around them returned to their own routines, some casting approving glances toward the teen,